The highest office in the land is that of the presidency. It has great influence and power here in the United States and around the world. And when we think of power, we think of prestige as well, and that's where gold comes in. Gold is the most powerful metal across the world. That has been proven time and time again. So how do these two entities converge and influence each other? Well, we're going to talk about that in this video as we explore. Here we have an image of Donald Trump before he became president. I covered this story behind this picture in a video many years ago. And this is when Donald Trump rented out a portion of his office tower, Trump Tower in New York, to Amex. And this is a transaction paying for the first months of rent with 3-kilo gold bars. When we think about these bars, well, it gives us a great idea as to what they're worth. They have great value for sure. That has been persistent through time. Of course, back when they were transacted, they were considerably cheaper in terms of dollar amount than they are now. And that is partially due to inflation. The deflating value of the dollar has led to rising prices of gold, maintaining their value. This is why central banks around the world hold it, including our central bank. Our treasury, of which the central bank holds part of custodian of those gold bars. But what about these presidents, and what about the United States, and what about the purchasing power of the dollar? Well, it's a little bit nuanced here. Before we get into gold and the presidents, let's take a look at the lands and the states that make up the United States of America, and how much $100 is worth now compared to each state from which the dollar is transacted. You know, it's quite telling for sure which states where you can see a dollar is worth less according to the scale. The deeper red means that it's more valuable. The less valuable is a very, very faint pink. That gives you an idea of factors like the cost of living and local taxes affect the real value of money in terms of transactions in those states. So it's a nuanced discussion in terms of price differences and price increases as opposed to inflation. What is inflation? It is affected by presidents and their policy as to who they appoint to the Federal Reserve Board and who presides over them, the governor, the Fed chairman. But also, when you take a look at the dollar and the printing of these dollars, that is what causes inflation. And that is only perpetuated by deficit spending and more spending by the government, and that increases our deficits, which in turn leads to an increase in the debt of the United States of America. And when you count that and measure it by the GDP, well, it gives you a very clear picture of what's going on. But this type of thing only exacerbates it because it factors in the cost of living in some of these states. Like, for instance, the cost of living is very, very high in Massachusetts, very, very low in Mississippi. And you can see that $100 is worth about $113 in Mississippi. And in California, very expensive place to live. And you can see that it's $12 less valuable than it would be based off of the average. Illinois actually is very, very close, surprisingly. But of course, there's a lot of countryside there as well, too. You take that into account, it's only $1 off. So it's just fascinating to kind of see this nuance and difference between the value and what $100 can get you here in the United States, depending on which state you go to. Couple that with around the world, there are some very, very good deals for travel and for going on vacation in Europe. And many nations in Europe where the dollar is not nearly as strong and inflation is higher, your $100 goes a lot further than it would here. And even the most states that have the most conservative policies with friendly tax policy to really spur economic activity. But there it is. $100 is worth 26% less in California than in Arkansas, is the example that they show you there. That's pretty remarkable. Look at Alaska and Hawaii. Part of the reasons why they're lower, and actually I'm surprised Alaska is not that much lower than where it is, only $2, is getting the cost of goods and services. The supply chains aren't is connected in those states for obvious reasons. So I think that is quite profound and interesting to see. So you can see that these states, a variety of differences, and the fascinating thing is you see states like Mississippi and Arkansas where it's much, much higher there. Maybe those are states you might want to consider if you have to move or retire. You get more for your bang for your buck in those areas. Fascinating indeed. Now let's talk a little bit about gold again. What's a gold bar worth nowadays? We got to the point where a contract size bar is worth $1 million. I did a video on that as well too. But let's take a look at the scale. We have the newest iPhone, the iPhone 14 Pro Max here, but this is actually a graphic I think from the latest. Probably about the same size. You can see what a 1 ounce chunky bar would look like. In this case, very, very small for $2,500, $2,500. Costco's been selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of these 1 ounce bars per month. And it's been an amazing thing to see. It's brought a lot of news and excitement for sure out there. And then you have a half kilo bar that is something. That is 500 grams. That's $40,000. Yes, indeed, $40,000. That's just over 16 ounces of gold in one bar, half kilo. Then you've got the 1 kilo size bar. It's always been a dream of mine to own a kilo size bar. I remember when they were $40,000, $50,000. Now they're almost double that, $81,000 for a kilo size bar. But nonetheless, a lot of my reach for sure now. Then you have the good delivery bar, the standard gold bar, held and traded internationally by central banks. These weigh about 27 pounds, 400 ounces. It's worth $1 cool million, 400 ounces of gold. And gives you an idea. When you take a look at that and look at these kilo bars, this is what they look like in the hand. Small, rather thin bars, and it kind of makes sense that they would be that just because of the potential for tungsten poured there. But these are genuine things. The general articles has shifted to the hands here. So let's talk a little bit about what the gold prices were by the presidency. The president is a very powerful position, and it can, depending on who's in office, can set the mood. But even policies can affect it to some degree. But we'll see some interesting things in this diagram. All of these graphics come to us from Visual Capitalist. It gives us some idea of gold prices by U.S. presidents. So we can see here that it's changed dramatically. We're going back to 1989 when George H.W. Bush was president. And you can see that gold, had fallen about down 19% and whatever there it is. Well below $500 an ounce. But look at how stagnant gold has been through the course of two presidencies. And of course, you had the dot-com bubble, which hit around 1996 or so, and then people were putting their money in stocks from the dot-coms, and these great growth happened during the 90s. Of course, think about who was president and what the president did, what he signed into law, the Contract for America, which was initiated by the Republican House of Representatives, the Republican Revolution, as it's called. The Contract for America under Newt Gingrich brought in a lot of that spur of growth. Not a lot of activity happened under George H.W. Bush. Sadly, there was a Democrat-controlled Congress then, and so the president capitulated there and signed in a tax increase after this president said no new taxes. So it's interesting that during these presidencies, the roles were kind of reversed there. Presidents really showed little power because they were at the behest of the Congress at the time. Then you had the dot-com bubble had burst, and then we saw a new president, the son of a former president, and then gold's price spiked up 8% on 9/11 after that attack, the shock of that event. But notice how quickly it did recover, but it never dipped below $271 an ounce since then. I do remember when gold was trading at $252 an ounce. That was something. And I remember at the time thinking, why get into gold? The price is so low. And I just didn't. Of course, hindsight is 20/20 for sure, especially if I would have seen what would happen in subsequent years. By the end of George W. Bush's second term in office, gold had spiked up almost to $1,000 an ounce. and then it just spiked dramatically there in 2011. We see there under Barack Obama, and really the period of quantitative easing started with one after the financial crisis, and gold spiked up, and then it just kept going up. Amazing. This is the area here under Barack Obama administration where quantitative easing was set into motion at a dramatic pace, for sure. And then after 2011, it fell back down, but notice it stayed still well above $1,000 an ounce. At that point, we never saw it go below $1,000 an ounce. And then under Donald Trump, well, it kind of kept a lot of volatility in silver's price. You know, it went up 44% then. 215% was the biggest climb under George W. Bush. But then we saw what happened under Donald Trump. We had the pandemic hit, COVID hit, and we saw that this is in March with a big crash. And then by the end of 2020 or December 2020, it did spike up for the first time above $2,000 an ounce briefly, coming down but still staying up there pretty high. The volatility continued, and then under Joe Biden, an era from which we still are finding ourselves apart, even more volatility, and now the prices have climbed above $2,500 an ounce. Just amazing thing to see that big of a step upward there with gold. And it doesn't look like, you can see by this chart, this visualization, that gold has done very, very well under these circumstances, even though there's quite a bit of volatility, more than some would like. Well, there are higher lows than we've seen ever before. Just an amazing thing to see. And no matter what happens, I think, folks, I don't think we're going to see gold go back down. I think we probably have surpassed the $2,000 mark, and probably it's here to stay. The only way in consideration I would see that moving in the opposite direction would be something like what we saw in Barack Obama's second term, and where it had fallen again. That could happen, and we could see it dip below $2,000 an ounce. It is a possibility, given what we've seen here. And in this certain circumstance, what we've seen here, that could play out. But I kind of doubt it at this point. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section down below. Gold and the presidents, pretty amazing. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.